think marketers are starting to understand and want to account for different channels interacting with other channels and not solely looking at what type of clicks or texts or calls or scans are we getting, but to say, okay, this campaign's probably helping me elsewhere. How else is it doing that?
Hello, and welcome to The Marketing Architects, a research-first podcast dedicated to answering your toughest marketing questions. I'm Elena Jasper. I run the marketing team here at Marketing Architects, and I'm joined by my co-host, Angela Voss, the CEO of Marketing Architects.
Hello.
And we're joined today by a returning guest, Jordan Rossler, our Director of Analytics at Marketing Architects.
Hey guys, good to be back on. Thanks for having me.
J-Dog, love having you.
Always fun.
Thanks for joining. We're back with our thoughts on some recent marketing news, always trying to root our opinions in data, research, and what drives business results. This week is a big week for the agency. We've launched a report titled Everything Wrong with TV Measurement, the Attribution Playbook for TV Advertisers. You can download the report at marketingarchitects.com/measurement, and we've invited Jordan on the show to help break down the findings. And don't tune out if you're not interested in TV. This report might focus on TV, but its learnings can be applied to any top-of-funnel marketing channel. And we know how hard those channels are to measure, so there's plenty of great takeaways for any marketer to come. But before we get into that interview, I'll tee up the report. We surveyed more than 300 marketers, and those marketers work for companies with 50 million or more in revenue. They range across B2B, B2C, and hybrid business models, and they fill entry-level to C-suite positions. The industries included retail, software, real estate, CPG, fashion, transportation, and more. And we pursued this research to identify some top challenges facing advertisers when measuring TV's effectiveness and to provide a playbook to solve them. While digital might offer granular tracking and analytics, TV is often perceived as more challenging to measure, with 63% of current TV advertisers expressing doubts about their ability to measure TV accurately. But TV still generates the largest sales impact of any marketing channel. Although half of TV advertisers say difficulty measuring TV has led them to invest more in other channels. Only 37% say they're very confident in their TV measurement. 45% say linear or CTV is their hardest channel to measure. And over a quarter say measuring linear TV has been harder than expected. 23% say the same of CTV. So marketers are facing some pretty tough challenges when it comes to measuring an upper funnel channel like TV, and we're going to provide some best practices and practical takeaways to help tame the beast that is TV measurement. And that's a tall order, so lucky for us, we have a TV measurement expert, Jordan, here with us today. But let's start at the very beginning. I planned on Rob giving us a Rob history lesson on traditional TV measurement, but Rob is sick and he does not have a voice to share with us, so I'm going to let the recording he sent us take it away.
Let's rewind to the early days. Linear TV measurement began in the 1950s with the Nielsen Company, which became synonymous with TV ratings. Nielsen used a method called the odometer, which was attached to a household's television and recorded what was watched. This allowed Nielsen to track which programs were being watched and, crucially, their audience size. In the 1970s, Nielsen introduced the concept of the people meter. This device was more advanced. It not only recorded what was being watched, but also who was watching it. Each member of the household had a separate button to press, indicating their presence, which provided demographic data such as age and gender. The data collected from these devices was used to produce ratings. These ratings are essentially percentages that indicate the proportion of households watching a particular show out of the total TV households. For example, a rating of 10 means 10% of all TV-equipped homes watched that show. Ratings led to the development of gross rating points, GRPs, a metric that combines reach, the percentage of the target audience that saw an ad, and frequency, how many times they saw it. Advertisers have used GRPs to gauge the impact of their television ads, guiding billions in advertising spent. In the 2000s, with the advent of digital video recorders, DVRs, and later streaming platforms, measuring TV viewership became more complex. Nielsen adapted by incorporating these views into their ratings. However, the rise of digital platforms has introduced new challenges and competitors to traditional Nielsen ratings. And there you have it, folks.
All right, now I can reveal that wasn't actually Rob, it was his AI replacement. I'm really curious if any listeners picked up that something was off with that, because I think it sounds eerily similar to Rob, but we promise it's 100% AI generated. But we have a real human being with us today, so bringing us back to the present, Jordan, why is TV still so hard to measure?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think with a top of funnel channel like TV, really, we don't talk about this very often, but everything from even the number of impressions of a given ad is something that's estimated and extrapolated, not to then mention the actual measuring the impact of what TV is doing for your business. I think that's just because TV is getting mixed in with so many other touch points. You see an ad and you go to a paid search link. It makes you more likely to click a social link. You talk about it with your friends and family, not to mention then you're watching TV at home, at work, out with friends, over at a family's house. Where are we hitting you? Where are you going to be responding from? How do we even track that, even if we could? And so I think some of that makes just the bare bones tracking of kind of the digital side so tough. Then you add in a retail component for brands where retail is a factor. And then obviously we're on TV to move top of funnel metrics like brand awareness and other brand metrics. Measuring those things takes a ton of time. You're not going to move that overnight. And so I think just because of the reality of the measurement struggles from a tactical standpoint, but also the time component and letting TV actually start to work and let those dividends start to pay off, it's a lot different than a lot of other marketing channels, which I think just brings in a lot of other realities and challenges.
So not without its complexities. And I suppose today TV is also being compared to other digital channels that are sometimes taking credit for TV. And I'm guessing it makes TV measurement look pretty difficult, especially when you're like putting it side by side with stuff like paid search and meta ads that are just going to be easier to measure.
Absolutely. I mean, we talked about that back in the MMM episode where a spike in TV spend is going to drive traffic, yes, to direct and organic channels, but it's also going to drive to paid search or paid shopping type channels where those are going to spike in the immediate performance metrics, but also those more statistical econometric or MMM type models. And so even when TV is doing the job that you've hired it to do, other channels are stealing the credit and makes it a lot harder for it to kind of look good at the end of the day, which is a huge challenge that we talked about a lot in that episode.
So speaking of this challenge, we have a framework that we use for measuring TV, and we call it micro macro business. So how does your team use that framework to help address this challenge of TV measurement?
I think it's kind of our way of answering the question, if TV were working, where would I look in my business? And so you'd start with, are people pulling out their phones or tablets and responding right after an ad and going to the website? And if so, what can we learn from that? What types of stations and day parts and creatives are driving the bulk of that response? Then it's like, okay, if that's happening, then I'd expect to see some macro shifts on my website. I'd expect to see traffic go up and sales go up, conversion rate shifting, the on-site survey starting to pop, our retail traffic starting to go up a little bit. And so that's kind of the macro layer. But then it's like, again, we're hiring TV to move our business as a whole, our brand as a whole. So are we seeing the movement in metrics like brand awareness and brand familiarity and perception? Are we kind of resurrecting returning customers that may have been lapsed and not purchased for a year or two, that TV's that reminder message to come back? Are we driving people more often and increasing those LTVs and ultimately driving more revenue for the business? So it's kind of our way of organizing those categories and metrics into like, when would we look for this? Where would we look for this? And kind of how would it be impacting the business? And it's been a pretty handy framework for thinking about TV measurement in that way.
There's a ton of complexity, Jordan. I love that model for a couple of reasons, but it helps us make sense of a bit of a chaotic space. And I think the survey really attests to that too. But I think the other piece to it is, especially a channel like CTV is digital, right? And so I think a lot of marketers come out of the digital space, and maybe CTV is a stepping stone to more top of funnel channels, but yet they're still kind of employing the mindset around measurement related to digital. And I think the micro macro business as well, it's giving attention to where we should be looking to a channel like television that is so powerful and can move metrics that maybe other channels can't. Jordan, in the report, we say that actually the worst case scenario when launching a TV test isn't failing, but it's really not knowing. if it worked or if it didn't work. And we have clients come to us all the time from other agencies, or maybe they tried it on their own, and it happens more than you think. And it's a really painful situation. They just don't know really, did it work or did it not work? So how do we think advertisers should avoid coming away from TV with no learnings at all?
It's a good question. And like you said, it's something that we unfortunately see way too often of clients coming to us saying like, hey, we've done TV before, but you're asking for learnings. We don't really have much for you. How do we avoid that? And I think it starts with the test structure, right? So it's getting a budget amount where we have a reasonable expectation that, yeah, we are actually going to see the needle move, and not like with a microscope, but it's kind of to the naked eye. You can see movement, whether we're talking at a local or national level. And then I think it also comes down to the variables and other things you're doing in other channels that are changing, or more importantly, not changing during the test. So many times, even it happens with our advertisers where we launch a test, things are looking great. And then they're like, oh yeah, by the way, we completely changed our website on the day that we launched TV, or, oh, we started a new promotion, or we launched another new channel or two, all on the same day or week that we launched TV, which completely muddies the results and makes it really hard to know with any sort of confidence what's what. And so I think we need to be okay with truly having a fairly controlled experiment where the only variable you're changing is TV, whether it's a national or a local test, to increase the confidence that's there. And then I think from a learning standpoint, kind of thinking ahead of time, what key learnings do we want? What key metrics do we want to move? And let's make sure we're set up from a just nuts and bolts standpoint that everyone involved in the test has visibility to those metrics, and we don't get halfway into the test and you're asking, oh, what is this doing to our add to cart metric or something like that? And it's like, guys, we aren't even looking at this. We don't have access to that. And making sure that all KPIs are visible at the end of the day so we can answer the most important questions and get the learnings that are going to be the most valuable.
I love that advice too, related to micro macro business, right? Just before we've even started, if we know TV can or should, or we'd really like them to drive impacts in all three of those areas, what would they be? And we might not be able to see them all right away. I think that's where someone that has a lot of experience in TV can go like, okay, in the business bucket, we have a lot of confidence that TV can do this, but here's some general guidance as to how long that might take or how much we might need to spend to be able to see some of those impacts.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a struggle that I think marketers want stuff to work overnight. And it's like, guys, we have to rethink our expectations here. And that's one part of the micro macro business, is we say the micro part is happening minutes after the airing. The macro part is days, weeks, maybe a few months after you initially launched TV. And the business impact is 3, 6, sometimes 12 plus months to kind of fully be able to zoom out and see those things. And it's an unfortunate reality that it's not all day one, but I think that's just an inherent reality. Like Elena, you said, not just with TV measurement, but all forms of top of funnel marketing.
I was going to say, I think micro macro business could be a great framework, regardless of if you're doing TV. I know TV is a little bit special as an upper funnel channel because it does drive that immediate response as well as the long-term response. I would think radio, like even out of home, some of this advice about micro macro business and then also testing frameworks, especially, could be really relevant if you're going to launch an out-of-home campaign. Maybe start local, prove it out, hold your other marketing channels steady. I think that applies for any marketing test, but just because upper funnel can be so hard to measure, but we know it works. But yeah, leaving a test not knowing if it worked or not, it's definitely one of the most frustrating outcomes. So Jordan, there's a line that has become a staple of the analytics team at Marketing Architects, and it is, all models are wrong,
but some are useful.
Yeah, we've gotten so good at that on the podcast, like 50th time is the charm. Jordan, why has that become a mantra for your team?
The reality is every model has a downfall, right? That's kind of the reality of marketing measurement, especially with TV. You can poke holes, and I'm a big hole poker. I love to find what's wrong in every single model, from attribution windows being limited to needing to extrapolate from a sample and assume that the national population is exactly representative of that, to needing to pick some sort of baseline or projection or forecast that you know is inaccurate, but you kind of just need to roll with it and say, this is the best we can do. No model is perfect. We always say there's no silver bullet. I wish there was, but we've been talking about how TV is moving everything from immediate traffic and minutes right after an airing to familiarity with your brand. You can't measure all that in the same model. And so I think that's just an inherent part of marketing, like we've been talking about. When all the models start to say something similar, you're seeing positive movement right after airing. you're seeing positive movement in your site as a whole, you're doing a test versus control local test and you're seeing overall movement and all the metrics throughout the funnel, your brand studies are starting to show positive movement. That's where like, okay, all the models are starting to row in the same direction here. And it feels like we have some alignment. Where things get a little crazy is when one model's saying things are good, one model's saying things are bad. That's usually when you have a data issue. And then that helps catch those data issues. Because if you only were looking at one model, you might have a data issue in there that you would never find. And so I think it's a source of accountability to make sure all the models are truly saying the same thing, but also a way to look at TV from a truly holistic view and not expect one model to capture every single piece of what TV's doing.
I think that's kind of a refreshing point of view too, because you see all the time vendors saying like, we can measure TV just like digital and claiming that there's one model that's going to solve everything. And while this answer might feel a little bit uncomfortable, it's going to lead you to a better result. And I like just how upfront your team is about that. I think it's refreshing. So we've talked a lot about frameworks, belief systems. I'd like to get really practical as we can. So Jordan, what are some of the most useful models your team uses to judge TV performance?
We've mentioned it a couple times, but I do kind of think that the incrementality test at a local level is honestly the gold standard for TV measurement. I mean, if it were completely up to me, that's probably how we would do every single test, whether we're doing linear or streaming. There's inherent extra costs that come, especially on the linear side with that. But I think what you get is the total controlled experiment of having a set of control markets versus your test markets. You can use the controls to be just that of what would have happened had we not have TV, with the business be up, down, or flat. And then you're not tied to one specific metric. You can look at sessions, you can look at orders, you can look at awareness, you can look at retail lift, all those things, because you're not tied to clicks coming in through a pixel or whatever, that you kind of have to assume, well, these would or wouldn't have been here without TV. It's much more controlled and you can do a lot of things that way. In a national test scenario, we rely on things like ACR modeling and spike-based modeling to find kind of those campaign optimizations and say what's working, what's not from a station, day part, creative standpoint. And then I think from there, other models and tools like using surveys, the how did you hear about a survey, to see, are we getting more credit from TV there? Some sort of period over period, whether it's month over month, year over year type test of creating a baseline of what would we have expected based on what we saw last year or last month and what are we seeing now? And then all the way up to the more advanced statistical models that we talked about in that MMM episode, of some sort of MMM or econometric model to say, okay, let's zoom fully out here. Let's look at a couple years worth of data and now pump in the data that we have with TV and see how the business is changing. So those are some of the kind of usual suspects, I would say, for where we go first for TV measurement.
It's sort of interesting how lately incrementality and MMM, like two concepts that it seemed like for a while marketers were kind of like, oh, that's old news. Now they're becoming popular again for more than just TV. I feel like I've heard more and more about both of those.
I think marketers are starting to understand and appreciate and want to account for different channels interacting with other channels and not solely looking at, okay, we're running this type of campaign. What type of clicks or texts or calls or scans are we getting? But to say, okay, this campaign's probably helping me elsewhere. How else is it doing that? Those other models, like advanced statistical model, tries to control for and look at all that. And then, like I said, those market-wide tests, you can let the revenue roll in and see what the metrics look like across those different channels. And at the end of the day, what the ROAS is. And it's a pretty holistic way to view TV, but at a still very meaningful level of getting some sort of ROAS number at the end of the day.
In the report, Jordan, we tell marketers that they should, quote, challenge everything when it comes to TV measurement. How would you recommend marketers approach an upper funnel channel like TV with that challenge everything mindset?
I love that we say this, because this is definitely our motto as an analytics team. And I think it just starts with asking a ton of questions. Ask yourself, does this result make sense? Is there another way to validate this or increase our confidence or run a different model to see if we can get a second result that's really close to this one? If this result were true, what else would have to be true? And sometimes it's like, okay, well, if this is true, then our other channels aren't doing what they're saying they're doing, because the sum of all the parts is greater than the total pie. And that's kind of where you can start to understand where might over attribution be happening. What else could be causing this result, whether it's good or bad? Like I mentioned, half the time when you have a really positive or negative result, it's because of a data issue that we didn't catch, or that the client didn't catch, or whatever, or we're catching for the first time and they didn't know they had a data issue. And now it's like, okay, well, once we iron that out, now the result is much more in line. And so I think anytime you just take something at face value and run with it and don't really stop and think like, does this make sense, is where you can get into a lot of trouble, whether it's a good or bad result. Asking those questions is a good place to start, along with trying to run another model or two in parallel that's somewhat independent to see if you get a similar number.
It's been so nice to have you on the show today, breaking down this report for us, bringing your big brain. So if you could leave the listeners just one piece of advice when it comes to measuring upper funnel marketing, what would it be?
This is a really good question. I think for me, it would be a challenge to marketers to at least consider newer additional models and new and additional benchmarks to use for top of funnel channels other than what you're using for the bottom funnel channels. I mean, something I like to be really upfront with our advertisers about is that if you're expecting TV to perform at the exact same level as your bottom funnel channels on those bottom funnel KPIs, TV is going to lose that battle probably 9 times out of 10. But we have to acknowledge we're hiring TV to do a different job than what we're hiring those other channels to do. And so we need to measure it differently and evaluate good versus bad differently than those other bottom funnel channels. And so I think I would just challenge marketers to think about how can we start to differentiate between those jobs that we're hiring our marketing channels to do and tweaking how we're measuring and determining whether it was a success or not.
Classic jobs to be done stuff. Good stuff, Jordan.
I was about to say, and probably love that. It's a jobs to be done framework for your
Yeah.
marketing channels.
Yeah.
I do have one last question. We love data at Marketing Architects, so I wanted to ask, what's everyone's favorite unbelievable statistic? And Jordan, we'll kick it off with you.
So you guys probably know this, but for listeners who don't, I am a massive sports fan. I probably could do an entire podcast of just unbelievable sports stats, but I'm a huge golf fan. And I think Tiger Woods' statistics of dominance are just always the craziest stats to me. So I got one for you guys. From the 17-year period from 1997 to 2013, if you guys don't know, every year in golf, there's 4 massive events called the majors. And so Tiger Woods' score in that 17-year period relative to par was 126 strokes under par. The next best golfer who had played at least 90 rounds in that same period was 125 strokes over par. So said differently, Tiger Woods was 251 strokes better than the next best golfer in the biggest events in the world in that time period, which is just, I don't know how to say utter dominance other than that. That's absolutely insane.
I actually just came across this one the other day. I didn't realize this, but we could maybe challenge Jordan on this one because he is a mathist, as they say. So if you were to take a standard piece of paper, which is about 0.1 millimeters thick, you're nodding. Do you know this one already?
I've heard something along these lines before.
Okay. If you were able to fold the piece of paper 42 times, the thickness of the paper would be greater than the distance from the Earth to the moon.
That is absolutely unbelievable.
Right? Isn't that crazy?
Yeah, that breaks my brain
I
a
know.
little bit.
I know. Yeah.
There was a similar one of a distance thing where if you take all of the like veins and arteries and capillaries in your body and stretch them end to end, it would be, I think, 60,000 miles long. So be able to wrap around the Earth like almost 3 times, which is absolutely insane that we have that much just inside our own body.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. That one, that grosses me out.
I was going to say, that's like the same feeling I get when I see a skeleton. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm that.
Yeah.
I'm that skeleton. I have one that's also sports related. So March Madness wrapped up a little while ago, and I heard this stat on the radio. Your odds of picking all 63 March Madness games correctly is 1 in 9.2 quintillion. So that's similar odds to finding an exact grain of sand on a beach blindfolded on your first attempt, or winning the Powerball lottery every week for several million years straight.
Wow. That's a great one.
Makes me feel a little better for never having a perfect bracket yet, but I've got at least, hopefully a handful more tries. That's crazy.
Yeah, it doesn't even make any sense to me, but there you have it. Also, a quick shout out to TV and the women's final for March
my
Madness,
goodness.
beating the boys for viewership. It's a pretty cool TV moment.
A new stat.
sure.
And now we'll let Rob's AI have it say.
You guys feeling hungry? Every year, Americans eat about 100 acres of pizza a day, or about 350 slices per second. That's actually kind of gross.
How much is Rob contributing to that? I I mean, he has some pretty obscene eating habits. I don't know if he's told you about his White Castle burger addictions, but he doesn't sit down and eat just a couple. Let's just put it that way. So God only knows what he does with pizza.
I'm definitely curious how many acres of pizza I've eaten in my lifetime. I plan to add at least a couple more at this point.
I'm going to say, Rob, he loves his AI voice, but the downside of having an AI voice on the podcast is it cannot defend itself. So
I know.
Rob's just at the mercy.
It's just so much better that way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Listen to how quiet it is. Oh,
Jordan, thanks for joining us today. Reminder, go to marketingarchitects.com/measurement to download the report. And we'd love to know what you think. That's it for this episode of The Marketing Architects. We'd like to thank Ayana Klaphocky for producing the show and Taylor De Los Reyes for editing. You can connect with us on LinkedIn, and if you find the show valuable, please leave us a rating and review. And if you'd like to hear more from us, subscribe to our weekly email newsletter. It's built for marketers seeking research-first analysis of the latest trends. You can go to marketingarchitects.com/newsletter to subscribe. Now go forth and build great marketing. The Rob AI does really sound good.
even when I listen to it, like I obviously listen to Rob talk a lot. I know his little inflections and stuff. And without someone telling me in advance, I still don't know that I would know.